Today I'd like to tell you the story of the Mystery Flesh Pit. The Mystery Flesh Pit was, and I suppose still is, the giant orifice of a Lovecraftian horror, a superorganism that inhabits the ground of an expanse of land in Gumption, Texas. Discovered in 1973, though indigenous folklore and remains of ancient people in the pit suggests it existed and was known centuries before, the inside of the creature was made into a national park supported by the Anodyne Company. The park was bizarre, to say the very least, with the innards of the giant creature developed into hiking trails, campsites, and even spas, with corporate tie-ins including the likes of Coca-Cola and McDonald's. The park, however, was also infested with strange, dangerous wildlife, including such abominable creatures as the abyssal copepod, macrobacteria, the Venus shamble, the amorphous shame, and the gastric bristleworm. The park was shut down in 2007 after the organism was disturbed and began to move, resulting in hundreds of deaths. A lesson in why we humans would do best not to interfere with matters in which we have no understanding. The Mystery Flesh Pit remains just that, a mystery, one we can't fully comprehend, though in this video, I'll attempt to explain it. It all began with oilman Jim Jackson in the 1970s. Born in Boston and raised in California, Jackson defied his parents to become a vagabond and chase his dreams, settling in Odessa, Texas, and styling himself as a Texas cowboy. Using his inheritance, he began a surveying office in Midland and assigned one of his workers, Dale Whitmer, to investigate a most unusual discovery of his, the flesh pit. Jackson confided in one Colton Fleming the discovery of the flesh pit, telling him he believed it was something special and needed to be protected from federal oversight and regulation. So with Fleming's help, Jackson enlisted the Anodyne Deep Earth Mining Company of Fort Worth to reinforce and develop the pit. Jackson oversaw the construction of the first paths and steel passageways within the organism, and he began giving personal tours. In April 1980, the Mystery Flesh Pit was annexed into the U.S. National Park System, with President Jimmy Carter meeting with Department of the Interior and Anodyne personnel at the entry site itself to officially sign the proclamation. From 1978 to 1981, extensive development and improvement of the park's interior infrastructure took place, supported by a 1979 expedition to study and map the gross anatomical structure of the superorganism, a joint effort by the U.S. and the Soviet Union called Project Freefall. From there, the park became a massive tourist destination, though not without a plethora of difficulties and safety concerns. Obviously, the interior of the superorganism was a hostile environment to visitors. This safety pamphlet released by the park cautions guests against disturbing anatomical fauna, lest they be hunted. Perhaps the most disturbing creature one could find in the pit was a compound surface organism, that is, animals dragged by park wildlife into the pit, causing them to undergo a strange process called anatomical amalgamation, which results in the creation of a hideous hybrid animal. These creatures only lived for a few hours or days, and their existence was nothing but suffering. On rare occasions, humans might become part of one of these hybrids, in which case an experimental and highly secretive medical procedure would be implemented to try and save them. The procedure was developed by scientists at Baylor Medical Center with Anodyne's backing and consisted of salvaging the victim's brain and other intact organs, supporting them with machines, and basically assembling the person back together as something of a cyborg with limited quality of life, to say the very least. It's not known how many of these individuals are alive today, if any, but I personally would rather be dead if I were them. Needless to say, though the developers of the Mystery Flesh Pit hoped to exploit it for profit, marketing the pit proved tough, especially for the fact that you could be killed or made to suffer a fate worse than death from encountering the many Lovecraftian monsters that called the pit home. Families were a particularly hard sell, given many children feared the idea of being eaten alive. The park solution was to introduce the friendly cartoon mascot Caver Coop, who, in an animated film shown in the visitor center, would reassure children, and often their parents, that the pit was reinforced and perfectly safe. The park also played up special adult fun for mom and dad, which referred to the amniotic thermal springs, whose amniotic ballast had aphrodisiacal effects on bathers, with various baths having varying degrees of potency. Everyone who entered the baths had to be nude, as synthetic fibers could agitate the superorganism system. And while the least potent bath, the main bath, was open to everyone, all other baths were restricted to visitors 18 and up. Coca-Cola capitalized on the springs by using their amniotic ballast to create the beverage Coke Heartthrob. McDonald's followed suit with a similar product, the Feel-Good McFlurry. And there were many other medicinal products made from the ballast as well. Of course, you won't be able to buy any of these nowadays or explore the natural wonders of the anatomy of the superorganism, as the park closed in 2007 following a horrible tragedy. It happened on July 4th. Unseasonably high rains forced park administrators to cancel a July 4th concert and fireworks display, scheduled to take place on the surface park grounds. To compensate and appease guests, the park extended its hours to midnight. Ordinarily, the closing time was 8 p.m. In addition, harvesters mining for amniotic ballast and other commodifiable materials began to work overtime in the pit in order to make a quota by the holiday weekend. All this caused extra stress on the pit, and systems designed to maintain the park began to fail. Rainwater, ordinarily pumped out of the pit, began to enter it freely, causing a choke response from the superorganism. Needless to say, this caused catastrophic damage to the park's infrastructure and trapped many guests inside the pit. Workers tried to drug the superorganism into a docile state with 20,000 liters of aconitine, a toxin produced by wolfsbane. In response, the pit released lactogastric chyma, effectively flooding itself and drowning and digesting visitors, some of whom almost made it out of the giant creature's gaping maw before sliding back in. The chyma exploded out of the pit in a geyser that erupted for several minutes, spewing 3 inter-pit life forms onto the surface, which began hunting visitors until staff managed to kill them. The superorganism then gave a mighty roar and began lifting its extremities out of the ground, prompting the White House to authorize the Pentagon to take nuclear action if the superorganism became ambulatory. The violent spasms of the inside of the pit only began to subside once an undisclosed contingency measure was activated and rescue missions were initiated with limited success. A field hospital was constructed, though some injured visitors inexplicably walked back to the flesh pit and crawled back inside, apparently longing to return to it. The National Guard and FEMA were brought in to contain the superorganism. Individual industrial sedatives were injected into the superorganism, and the park was permanently closed in the wake of the tragedy. 750 people were killed, and 1,800 were critically injured. In case you haven't caught on by now, the story of the Mystery Flesh Pit National Park is just that, a story. It is a work of fiction by Trevor Roberts, who has undoubtedly made a monumental achievement in world building. I applaud Trevor for his creativity and implore you to check out the rest of the details of the Mystery Flesh Pit, whose official website I'm linking to in the description. Thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed the Flesh Pit's surreal cosmic horror and support Trevor in all his creative pursuits. And remember, try not to get eaten alive by a giant subterranean monster. And don't get scared out of sorts.